Hello, this is Pushing Boundaries, a podcast about pioneering research, breakthrough discoveries, and unconventional ideas. I'm your host, Dr. Thomas R. Verney. My guest today is Apab'yan Tew. Do I pronounce that correctly?
In Maya, it will be Apab'yan Tew.
Okay, Apab'yan Ten.
Tew.
Oh, got it. He's a speaker, herbalist doctor, bones therapist, auxiliary midwife, writer, researcher, musician, and ceremonial dancer and singer, currently practicing in the highlands of central Mexico, Chiapas, and Guatemala. He's the author of The Birth of a Universe, The Maya Science of Pregnancy, which he very kindly sent to me, and I have read most of it. Uh, Welcome, Apab'yan. Let's start with whatever you want to start with. You started telling me how you got in touch with me. Why don't you start there?
Well, yes. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation for the podcast. Thank you very much also to answer the connection that my wife made with you, my beloved wife, Egle, who is the strong element in this moment to help me to assist and to also collaborate and do all this industry labor of understanding, researching, putting things in order, and also uh, uh, doing her own apportation of ideas for to make this new thing of talking about an ancient science to come to everybody. Thank you very much, and for me, it's a pleasure to meet you because, and I'm going to show us also, I got this book.
Okay.
And this book belongs to a moment in my life in which I still weren't doing what I'm doing in this moment in a fully, let's say, way. I got your book here in Mexico City as a lending of a friend because I was surprised of a very peculiar phenomena that I saw in her family. In my friend's family, there were some of the brothers had kids, but her case was something that was always getting me very interested because she was a very shy person. As a mother, she was always a very shy, silent person. And he had three kids, and the three kids were incredibly strong, incredibly healthy, incredibly active, and let's say explosive in ideas and creative. These kids that instead of holding the instead of watching the TV or like now holding the phone, they were building stuff and opening books. And I asked her one day, what did you did? What happened that your kids that makes your kids so different from other kids that I have seen? And she lent me the book. She says, I read this book. And it was precisely La vida secreta del niño antes de nacer, the secret life of the unborn child. And then I read your book, and it caused me a lot, give me a lot of ideas and insights. But in those days, I was not like in the idea of having kids or even beginning what I'm doing now. Then by let's say by general culture, for us to say something, I hold all these insights and ideas. But later on, by things regarding my work, I began to see the value the value of this knowledge in a different ways. Because I began to be the a person that was helping a midwife. Well, then I'm going to jump back. When what I do now is that I am what in Maya culture we call the spiritual guide. The spiritual guide is the one that holds, that keeps the knowledge of an ancient calendar, the Maya calendar, that I will say is based on the rhythms of the patterns of light and obscurity, the sun, the moon, the stars, the pulse of the earth. Is a calendar, is a calendar whose foundation is astronomical, but we are also very landed in the pulses of the earth, and mostly because we still produce our own food, then we have to be tracking and keeping and listening to the elements surrounding us. The spiritual guide holds that knowledge, and at the same time, we are trained sometimes because it's your inner interest, sometimes because, as in my case, some things puts you to do something. And we have also what is considered to be the healer, the herbalist, the person that heals problems with the bones and muscles. And what an spiritual guide has a lot of different variations of expressions. I, as any other average Maya person who enters into this world, I went into a very strict and, let's say, arduous training as to achieve all this, to achieve, to keep that, to maintain, and to understand everything that has been given during centuries, maybe even millennia of practices.
Hold it for a second. Can you tell us a little bit more about those 19 years that you spent training?
In the basic form of training, it always entangles nine months, and depending on the teacher and on the strength of the apprentice, sometimes is also 3 cycles of Venus, which it means 3 per 9. 3 per 9 months. Then we are more or less a couple of years in training. And later on is the practice and the experience. In that sense, I have more than 19. I have, in this case, it will be 26 to 27 years of practice. Those training entangles understanding. It's a very complex. You need to know mountains, valleys. You have to go to nature. You track the patterns of the stars. You are told how to read the clouds to do the calculations of the rain, for example, observations of patterns of animals as to track how they also are behaving according to the weather, for example, how to understand the positions of the stars to calculate also the quantity of rain, therefore to prepare the seed. But at the same time, it's the observation of nature, the observation of patterns of behavior in society as a community, but also to understand the human being, the personality, the character, the impulses. And it entangles a lot of work. You are working with your teacher, you are being guided, and then you began to receive little by little all the knowledge. This is not like having classes. This is a presential, person-to-person way of understanding, and you began to acquire, like, what I will say, the skills and then the experience by also looking at your teacher doing his own work. In my case, I was fortunate because I was first guided by a ceremonial speaker, a poet, a man, but also later on I was guided by a woman who was the most important, a midwife, and I had the beautiful experience of being trained by both sides, the feminine and the masculine, and I could see how, although it is the same knowledge, there's a different perspective, and that's why I consider that to be of a high value. They were my mentors, my teachers, my guides, and I will say in this moment that whenever I'm presenting this knowledge, in reality, well, I am the one that is telling, but this is not mine. This is us, our knowledge in the Mayan way of talking about society and the common wealth of everybody, including the knowledge, the preservation of knowledge. This is us, is the Maya Quiche lineage from the highlands of Guatemala, specifically in my town, Nahual Ha, who is translated as the spirit of the water. And we are the spiritual guides with this training and with this experience and with this highly, let's say, attached to the preservation in communal ways of knowledge and well, the preservation and the preservation and also the improving of the knowledge, the revision, the new research, because we're not isolated in the mountains. We're looking at what is happening in present time in different ways. And it's not only, as I said, the preservation, only the diffusion, the understanding what was given. Then this is a long process of understanding. And the most important after you begin to practice is when the teacher says, well, now go you alone. You have to go, you have to know by your own ways, in your own steps, what is this knowledge. Later on, we're told that experience is the most important part. The achievement is arduous, but I will say that experience is the most important part.
So you say about the woman who was teaching you that for her I was above all an assistant, for him his spiritual son. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, what happens is that the spiritual guide, the one that leads you, the one that is going to the one that also, I can be said like that, the one that chooses you to teach, is also a spiritual father immediately. Even the way we talk, for example, when we say nan, that it means mother, and tat, that it means father. When you enter into the arduous training moment, he automatically or she automatically is, they turn to be your mother and your father. They are your spiritual fathers. They are the ones that, beyond the biology of mom and dad, they are the ones that by spirit or by nature, by consciousness, they are going to guide you. For my teacher, the male, that Diego Adrián Huarchaj, the relationship was in a sense like he adopted me. He offered me always to be in the house. He was very strong to present me with authorities, and he was like, "Here is my apprentice," and I was shaking. Then he took the form of a spiritual father, of a father. For my teacher, I was an assistant for the woman, and the difference in this case is not that she wasn't that loving or that or on that spirit of guiding. What happens is that traditionally, the role of a midwife is not for a man. In Maya society, the midwife is always a woman. And I will say this is due to the procedures of messaging and tracking what happens in the body of a woman. But my case was very unique in that sense. That's why in the book I make a remark that he took a little bit more over that, but she was no less in reality. What was the challenge in those years of my training, that is just barely in the end of the last century and the beginning of the new one, is that I was going to be always close to her, and it was going to be in the town such a peculiarity to see that a man was beginning to enter into that. For me, it was a privilege. And by the way, I have to be honest in one sense. Originally, I didn't want to enter into this, knowing that by gender there are differentiations in what you can do and what are your possibilities. But I was living with her, and little by little, curiosity, getting the BS of trying to understand what is happening. And by the way, what am I going to be talking later? What is the magnificent and brilliant way of understanding knowledge and behavior and healthiness or unhealthy or illness? What a beautiful is to understand that with a frame, with this fantastic calendar, which holds a frame of the understanding of nature of the days. And as the saying says, well, curiosity kills the cat. Well, I entered because it was amazing to see those beautiful people. As a resume, I would say, yes, in the book I'm seeing that, but my woman teacher was no less, maybe even more. But just because of this little fact that the man is not usually the midwife, is that I made a little change in there.
Let's talk about the calendar. Let's talk about the calendar, which seems to be so very important, right?
Yes.
So I understand that generally you use a 20 counting system, like it's based on 20 instead of hours, which is 100.
Yeah, well, there are different ways. There's a basic frame of 20 nominal days that holds the that speak about elements of nature as thunder, as the jaguar, as the eagle. And there are 13 numbers, which also helps for mathematical calculations. Anyways, even there are the Maya calendar is also an instrument to schedule time, to calculate and to do activities, right? To schedule activities. But beyond that, this is a calendar based on astronomical elements. Then when we combine 20 per 13, we have 2060, which among some other things is also the calculation of Venus positions, Venus manifestations, as, for example, the morning light. It also helps us to understand the pulses of the moon, because we can also calculate the moon by those numbers. Is also the growing of the highland resistant to cold corn, some species. And in this case, directly is the way to calculate or to track and to make the connections of everything that I have said, Venus, the moon, the pulses of nature, and the earth, to understand the growing of a human being. Is the average frame to understand creation of the being. That's why the calendar is so important. It's a 9 months, 20 per 13, 2060 to 200 days and 60 days to do the basic frame of a story.
So you actually...
We also hold a solar calendar, but in this case, the solar calendar, which is called Masewaltir, but it's a civil solar year, helps more for that, for civil or for society activities. But what we call the sacred, or what we call the Venus calendar, the human being calendar, the highlands core calendar, the lunar moon astronomical calendar, is the one that we use for the purposes of understanding.
That is 260 days?
Yeah.
The sacred calendar, the Tzolk'in?
Exactly.
Is 260 days, right?
Exactly.
Okay. And then the other calendar is the secular calendar, the Hab?
Exactly.
Which has 365 days.
Exactly.
Okay, but you are, of course, working much more with the sacred calendar, the Tzolk'in, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so then how does that calendar relate to pregnancy?
Well, here is my point. Thank you very much for asking that question. I will make just a little observation. When I began, and this is not common, but when I began to practice my ceremonies, or when I began to track stars, when I began to understand things as, for example, when a gust of wind, or how a gust of wind is related with the behavior of birds, and to understand the clouds and therefore rain or not raining, or how the foggy mountain unfolds, different manifestations of nature, I was attracted to understand and to track with this Tzolkin or Cholq'ij. We call it Cholq'ij in my language, in my idiom. And I was already very interested how I could begin to calculate. You know, when someone told you something, it's one thing, but when you began to understand, it's different. Well, I was already with that fascination and with that curiosity when by some events in my life, I was taken into, let's say, additional training by a woman who was the midwife, my teacher, Nan-Ia Catalinta Linsop, who, and then I began to see her practicing. In the beginning, it was like a shy approach, but she was very clever to see not only that I could learn, but also to begin to put me into action. When I met her, I was already a bone healer. I already did massages, or I already practiced what can be some equivalents to chiropractic things, but in this case, it's a little bit different. Then she saw that I knew, and sometimes and she began to ask me things like, "Can you do a massage for the hips of this woman? She's in pain. She's pregnant. Be soft," for example. Or sometimes she was like, "This woman has cramps in the muscles. Can you do a massage?" And I began. People little by little began to be interested in looking at me, but I have been, as I said, experienced, right? I have been practicing bone healing since I was 9 years old by another factors. But what I'm saying is that I already knew. I already began to be applied that part of the knowledge. And then, going back a little bit of what I said, the curiosity began to make me see things that were peculiar. For example, and I'm going to say something that is very easy to see. It was not the same situation if the baby was expected than if the baby was unexpected. I began to see more repercussions in the woman's body, in the woman's bones, or in the way of how woman recovered from illness if she was emotionally supported in the family and if she was not. I will add one ingredient. In my town, there's a lot of migration of the natives to go to the USA. It is not unusual that a woman gets pregnant and the father, for the urgency of providing, has the necessity to go to the USA. Then it is also not that much unusual to see that a pregnant woman, a young woman, is alone in the house with the father in distance. I began to notice that for the woman who were alone, even with money, because sometimes they send money, sometimes they disappear also. But when woman was supported in the house, when the father was there, there was more stability than when the father was not, and when she has to cross anxiousness, problems, even rejection for being pregnant and alone and stuff like that. Being my task to soften, to prepare, to begin to, as I said, like massaging here and there, cramps. I began to see the patterns of the skin, the eyes, because there's a lot of things that you can read in the body of a woman during pregnancy. And then after looking at recognizable patterns when the father was, when the father was not, even when the father was, and subdivisions, when the father is supportive and when the father is not supportive, then I began to see the differences between the first child and the last child, or the medium child. I began to see patterns in how the body began to behave, and how what we can call the psychological repercussion of that. But then one day, by a fabulous insight, I began to see and connect what I have previously said. I understood I began to understood that the calendar, by tracking conditions that I will call mathematical also, weather conditions, or by looking the pulses of the earth, had a relationship with those moments with women. And then I began to see that the days of the Mayan calendar are also defining ways of what I can call creation. Then, for example, and to say something, for a particular day of the Mayan calendar is going to correspond the condition in which the father is not present. And I began to see that some definitions that we hold for tracking of time could also be applied to understand masculinity, femininity, the presence of the father, the absence of the father, the troubled mother, the comfortable mother. And I began to notice that for every day of the Mayan calendar, there was a condition that was, or there was a condition that can explain how pregnancy is given. And I was so fascinated about beginning to do the other, to calculate in the other sense, to calculate by doing prediction of patterns of behavior. Then in another step, I saw that according of how the mother is conceiving and how the atmosphere is, I began to notice the connection with the behaviors and patterns of way of personality of babies. As to say one thing, if a mother, for any reason, is too troubled, too anxious during any given moment, let's say a first child, a young woman in this case for my town, with no experience, facing the first time, let's say troubled by some situation, it's not difficult to see that the kid cries a little bit more, has some sort of illness, and later on that baby to present patterns of some sort of a recurrent anxiousness too. I began to trace all the connections as to arrive then to a conclusion that the Mayan calendar in its own frame, which is nature and astronomical based, also can serve to calculate and to understand the procedures, the elements, the conditions, the atmospheres of the human creation. And that was the beginning of a lifetime of enjoy and also the exploration of a lifetime in my life. It is fascinating to see that the day of birth can give us clues to understand the birth and the conditions of creation of a human being. By knowing that, we can calculate, we can predict, we can understand the nature of the quality of the decision making of a person, which is very interesting.
Stop. You're a great speaker. I have to stop you once in a while. Could you give
Yes, do it.
could you explain that a little bit? Could you give an example? For example, take my birth date, January 26, 1936. How could you do something about that? Could you explain something on the basis of that day?
Of course, first of all, when a person gives us the birthday in the, let's say, in the Western calendar, the contemporary in use, what we do is to use our books, our schemes, to my beloved wife is helping me. Which day, January? Which day did you say, January?
January 26.
26, 1936.
36, right.
Okay, when a person gives us the birthday in the Western way, what we do, what we used to do was to go to books. We hold books by manuscript books to track the time. Yeah. Now, due to, and thanks to the phenomena of the 2012 fake prophecies, so many mathematicians and programmers did calculations that now we can hold in the cellular phone. Then we Mayans, we are in technology also. We do the calculations now with the day. Well, is Oship? Wait, I'm reading. In just a moment.
Sure, take your time.
Which is the number? Oh, well. Oh, God. Well, let me finish. Then when we do that, we do the calculation to do to understand the Mayan day in the Cholqij or the Tzolk'in in the sacred calendar. Now, I'm going now for the people that is listening to us in this moment is happening something very interesting. Dr. Bernie's birthday, which is Waxaqip Bats in our language and also corresponds to that also that is a sacred day that also corresponds to the beginning of the or the reinitiation or the celebration of time in the is the day of the it's a sacred day of the celebration of the Mayan calendar and usually is considered the most important day of the Mayan calendar. We Mayans, we don't believe that time has a beginning or an end. We always consider the time to be flowing. There's no beginning point or ending point in our calendar. There's nothing like the 1st of January or the 31st of December. We flow, we continue. Then for starting a calendar, we don't have the number 1 position. We hold the 8, which is going to be understood as the reinitiation of tracking of time. Waxaqi Bat's 8 monkey, the number is 8 and the name is monkey. 8 monkey is the day in which we celebrate the tracking of time. It's the most important day of the Mayan calendar. And it happens that is your birthday. So, sacred synchronicity has happened in this moment. Now, what I can read in here, a person is giving me, is entering into my house and is giving me a birthday, and the baby is 8 monkey. First of all, I know for sure that in the house there's a strong mother and there's also a father that is no less, but still I do know that the mother hold more control over conditions of pregnancy than what the father was doing. That it means, for purposes of understanding an 8 monkey person, I will say that the masculine part and the feminine part are strong. Differently from what can happen when the mother is weak and the father is absent, when the mother is strong but the father is absent, which can be different to think that both were weak or indifferent to pregnancy, or when both were strong to have a baby. In this case, 8 monkey, I'm already knowing that the mother had a good control over pregnancy. I already know that it means that for the purposes of what I can see in the personality of this baby that is introduced to me, that baby is going to be a hard worker. That baby is going to be an entrepreneur in ideas. That baby is going to be strong, stubborn, and resistant. Resistant, I'm saying in the physical way of not to be ill. Everybody can be ill, but to overcome and to resist and to come back with strength. That is a person that is going to hold a strong personality, and not also a strong personality, a defying personality. 8 monkey entangles, in this case, I'm going to apply gender to the day, entangles his own strength as a person that, as the monkey, is going to be a leader, is a person that is going to be strong, inclined to ideas of art, literature, more inclined to arts, as to say something, and the developing of ideas. Because for us, The monkey ate monkey by linguistic repercussions or linguistic connections. In our language, it's called bats. But we can also pronunciate bats, almost the same, but this other bats means cereal. Then the person that is born on that day is also a person that interconnect ideas, that interconnect threads of thoughts. Is the person that connect all the dots. Is in a sense the embroidery of a canvas. Is the person that or the creation of a canvas. Is the person that can interconnect. Eight monkey in this sense explains the retransmission of a strength of a strong mother or a mother with a strong physical possibilities also to the baby. The baby tends to be strong, even in some cases athletes, but also is a personality that by threads, by connecting and by making notes, they create also, and I'm going to use the poetic way to say, is the canvas of knowledge. Is a strong personality. Now, what I can say in this moment is that until this moment, this is, let's say, a broad explanation, but you have to take into account what I am not mentioning. This is a strong interconnection, a strong person with a strong mother, but not less the father. But you just can imagine all the other possibilities. When, as I said, and this is a desired baby, by the way. Then that entangles that a desired baby is always connected with a baby or with a person that has a more strong self-confidence, a person that holds more integrity and even more resistance if the person adventures into new realms. That is something very specific to the monkey. The monkeys are very stubborn. The monkeys are those ones that you are not going to stop. And if you have a friend with that, you can count with a strong friend. This is what I will say in this moment, like in a broad sense.
Very interesting. So there are lots of things in your book that I totally agree with. One of them is that you write that in the section on intercourse, you say, and I totally agree with you, that there's a relationship between feminine pleasure and the holistic health of a baby, regardless of sex. There is a direct and statistically verifiable relationship between disease resistance and emotional stability. So in the Mayan culture, would you be comfortable asking a woman whether she enjoyed intercourse? Would that be something that you would be comfortable asking?
Well, first of all, I will say yes after successfully being delivering babies. And this implies that I have to tell you a little bit more about. My teacher, Nan Ia, was such a strong woman, was such a knowledgeable woman, but she was also a person that wanted me to know because I was interested. And yes, it's not usual for a man to be told to touch a woman's body, the legs, the waist, the hips, or to do examinations, right? But she always found a way to. She was one day like, hold me the alcohol, and I was stay here in the room, and I was like, oh no, I was like with closed eyes, right? But little by little, give me the alcohol, hold the leg, do this, give me the sixers, or whichever the task. Then little by little, the woman began to be getting accustomed to see that they call me the son of Nan Ia, Ukahol Nan Ia, el hijo Nana Talin. And what happened was that later on, I began to attend more and more and more, and to enter into that into practicing more about what was this, until the moment arrived. One day I received my baby, and then another, and then another. Then it was finally a moment in which, not only by what was already what Nantia built, but also what I was beginning to be told, that women began to be in confidence with that. But there's another factor that has to be taken into account. My town is not a big city, it's what we can consider a small town. And then we know mostly everybody in town. Not necessarily personal as to know a lot of details, but we know each other. People, my wife, who is not from Guatemala, the last time that we traveled, she saw everybody's hi Apab'yan, hi Apab'yan, hi Apab'yan. The people receives me, hugs me, and some of the babies that I received already had their own babies, and they were like, "Oh, I wish you were here to receive my baby," and stuff like that. But then they also what I by knowing the people in town, I will know the personalities of the fathers. I will also know here and there that the father was such a person, this and that. We also knew that some of the personalities of the fathers. Then I could begin to not to necessarily ask, "Oh, did you have that pleasure?" But mostly what the direction of the questions were about, like, "Well, you know this man, right? Was he treating you well?" Yeah, and the answer is, "Well, no, you know this, he drinks a lot or whatever." And little by little, by confidence, I could begin with the, "Can I ask you a question? Was this a successful creation of a baby? Because it is important for me to know." I began to, with certain people to whom I hold more confidence, to whom I know more the details about the relationships, the connections, the way you see them in the street, I could make the interconnections, and with some of them I began to ask. Later on, when things began to be also clear for the people, some women were also telling me directly, "Oh, it was a good situation, you know, he's very young, he's always driving by sex, and well, we have this night, but later on he departed from the house," and things like that. Later on, but years later, I began to do the systematic statistically ways of making questions at purpose. But first, I have to build the glory and the fame of being good to receive babies. Then people began to understand that part.
Okay. Okay. So there are a lot of things that you say that are very, very interesting, and I totally agree with. What in the chapter on foundations, talk about everything is connected. Everything belongs to a system. And then you say everything has life, and that I am interested in because, well, I just don't know whether everything has life. So how is it that you can say everything has life, not only what we call human or biological, but also what is not visible, as well as the solids without apparent movement? So can you talk more about that?
Yes, first of all, in that case, I have to tell you that there has been efforts, and in this case, I'm going to summon my teacher, the other teacher, the male that take that we have been, well, he started, now I am continuing the systematic study of linguistics to understand what beyond the influence of Spanish language is, to understand the proper ways of Maya thinking.
Mm.
Then one of the words that were always diving and floating or sinking and sometimes making a trouble was the word soul, which came with the friars and with the influences of the missionaries coming from Europe, and that entered into ceremonial language, and that entered also for to understand processes of different dimensions of human action as life after death, or what is life, or what is blah blah blah. But the word soul was already there. My teacher, by going into the linguistic proper Mayan ways, took out the word soul, and he asked me that we were not going to apply soul anymore for the purposes of understanding human behavior and patterns of impulses and character. We were going to use the word, the Mayan words for thought, for life, for impulse, for character, and so on. Taking out soul was also taking out what is more or less what we can call the Judeo-Christian or Abrahamic sense of having a life inherited by God and to improve or whatever the scheme is. I'm not going to go deep into that. But by taking soul, we in Maya could hold the proper ways to speak about what we consider life. One of the words is kushla or kushlashik, that for us means a way and in or a process that is directed from the heart as the let's say the element that holds life, the heart as the blood, the heart as the pumping life, and a way of thinking corporally and to do determinations not only with the brain but with the body, both. And another word that we use now is kaslem or kaslik, which defines life as when you perceive something, let's say, irradiating, something that you can perceive and sense. In that way, kushlashik can be understood as consciousness, as such, instead of a spirit, instead of nature, instead of soul. And then we Mayas, by doing this linguistic, let's say, observation, we talk that everything contains, by that means, not necessarily by using soul, but yes, consciousness. Everything holds a nature. Well, I'm going to use nature. Everything holds as for not to use nature in this way, everything holds a way of a life, a way of a consciousness, and it has and not is not necessarily what we can call organic. As for example, is not the same thing to read the fog in the mountain, for example, as when it's winter and when it's the moment of raining. We saw the elements of nature moving in their own rhythms, in their own pulses. And it's important to know to predict. It's important. That's why I talk about this as a science. It's important to know how the tracking can help you to predict, to understand, or to predict the nature of something. And then in the Maya ways of understanding, everything is alive, not because, and it's not related to biological life, but is related to the way in which we consciously, and that consciously, or the way in which certain ways of activity can reveal us a way of a thought or a way of a development, a way of a performance, and a predictable and patterns according and regarding to different atmospheres as different formulas. And for example, one thing, there's a beautiful example when we talk about which is the relationship between the ants and the rain, and why does the spiritual guide is going to see in the behavior of ants before preparing the seed. Everybody speculates and you can have different opinions, but at the end, the point is that if the ants before the rainy season form scarcity files and they are like dispersed, then there's going to be a lot of rain. They somehow, I'm going to apply the word somehow, know something. But if the ants, these specific ways of ants from the highlands, are making strong lines and there's an abundance of ants, then there's not going to be rain. Patterns in everything interconnect the comprehensions of the pulses of the earth, and we, as part of the earth, can read life in the way nature behaves. I'm going to say behave also. Although I'm applying human ways of understanding personality or activities, we can also use it in a way. We can take it off also, but by understanding that you saw the interconnection. You saw the interconnection of a very dark cloud with a scarcity of ants, the way a spider will build a spider web, the ways in which the roosters, for example, began to sing in the mornings, and you can see humidity, and everything is interconnected in that sense. You can feel how everything has a pulse, and later on you can begin to do your own predictions or your own, if not predictions, calculations.
I totally agree. I totally agree. But coming back to life, would a grain of sand have life?
Not necessarily. What we do in that way is that depending on what is the context of any given thing, that will reveal a participation or that will reveal a way of expression. But when I'm saying non necessarily is because not every grain of sand is going to help us for something, or is going to enter into something, or is going to be understood as something. In a broad sense, I will say yes, but I will make the little remark that the context and the atmosphere in which something enters into participation is the important part. But yes, with this emphasis, we always have to look at the context. Because, for example, a sandstorm is a combination of different ways of consciousness. Let's say in the earth, we believe the earth to be alive. And a gust of wind accompanied with sand, then it has an explanation. And then the repercussions are different than stepping onto sand in the beach. Yes, everything is alive, but we have to take into account what is that atmosphere in that element that we are seeing. For example, another thing like minerals, as quartz, for example, we consider them fully alive in a way that is not the human way. What I mentioned in the book is that for us Mayans, the ways of the human processing of information is not the element of measurement to understand the other or otherness. Mountains, rivers, the way in which the water is behaving and everything is in manifestation holds life. Yes, but to be king, you have to see where is that, how it is in the atmosphere, or what is the atmosphere in action.
May I ask you how old you are?
I'm 50 years old.
Years old. Okay. So in these 50 years, what's the most important thing you have learned about life?
Amazing question. I'm going to tell you the truth, and to be honest, in this moment, I will say that there's not the more important. For the experience that I have been holding, I will say that, and also by my own experience of life, I will say that in my case, there's not something like the most important. Because, for example, during different in my life, in different things, I have been helped. I have I know what I will say that for that there are different things, and I will not consider that that in different times of my life I have been considering different elements as to be the most important. Now I think that independently of what the lessons of life are, one thing that is always going to be the agglutination element is by the way loving. As when you said the different elements of understanding love of life, passion for life. In this, for example, in this moment, that's why I was trying to not to obvious to your question. I love my wife. I love the life that we're living together in this moment. This is the most important. But that is not necessarily the most important. That's why I don't put the hierarchy of which is the most. I would say in this moment, this is the what we in Maya we consider to be the balance. When both of us are working together and doing a balance of her femininity, my masculinity, my own femininity, and her own masculinity, and we both together balance and look for an equilibrium that make us also going to the front. But yes, that is in this present time. But in a broad sense, what every element of what has been my experience is, I will say for that, love and passion for what you do, what you love, what you say, the power of the word, loving life. In December, I saw attending one of my cases of an elderly woman who I attended, and I'm not going to make the long history, but she recovered after having a very toxic cancer in the blood. And I did my ceremonial work, if you will want to consider like that, and she improved in only 1 week, from being completely lying down in a bed to begin to cook herself and to attend even social events. People began to ask me, what did you do? What was that amazing that you did? Because they saw me messaging in what I will say in this moment is a lymphatic message, improving to boost the circulatory system. I did massage for relaxing the muscles. I did several things. But people were asking me, no, but that is the practice. That is what is the technicality of what you did. But in reality, what you did. And I was like, okay, if you're thinking that I make spells, it's not. I felt compassion and love for this moment. I consider for the beginning of the moment in which she says, yes, you can proceed. And in the moment in which I asked her to take out the socks, because I was going to begin with the legs and with the feet. I know in that moment I see a full life, a person, an elderly person who live a long life, who knows how many things she has to confront, how many things she has to deal with, how many times she lose in life, how many times she was bright happy. And in reality, the recollection of knowledge and everything of the techniques or whatever, yes, they serve. But in the moment of action, I will say, for to answer them and for to tell you that is in that case, and for this specific example, is yes, I was loving that woman, and I was loving everything that entangles a full life. And also in this case, that she already was sure that she was about to die, and in an amazing shift, she was like, I'm hungry, give me food. I'm going to attend that party. Please call the hair dresser, or I want a new haircut. And I knew, and what I can say is that yes, I was in the treasuring of a life that was not mine, but still is a human, beautiful being. And in that sense, once again, yes, it's love, but it depends how, where, and in the atmospheres in which you develop according to that.
Well, thank you. We'll have to stop there. I would love to do this again. You have so much to say, and it's so interesting, and it's coming from a very different point of view to what we are used to here in the West. So I just really would like to, if it's okay with you, to revisit this and get together in a couple of months again. Would that be okay?
That is perfectly okay. And I know that this is very different from Western appreciation because, first of all, I, as a citizen of the Mexican government, or as a person who originally was born in a big city, I know what is the Western view. I was even confronted, and I had to go into deep processes, inner processes, to enter and to acquire, and later on being living with both systems of understanding. And then I enter deep into the Maya ancient ways of understanding human nature in a different way.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. So we have to stop there. Let me just say that my next guest is going to be Dr. Gordana Dodig, professor of computer science and professor of interaction design at the Mälardalen University in Sweden. She will discuss with me cognition as a driver of evolution and evolution as a driver of cognition. So tune in if you like this program, and I hope you enjoy listening to Apab'yan as I have enjoyed him. So thanks again, and I shall definitely contact you again, okay?
Oh, that is okay. And thank you for everybody that is going to hear this conversation.
Thank you, and good luck in all your future adventures. Take care.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doctor.